I'm excited for this one. Welcome back to Scaling Through Structure. My guest today is Mike Abercrombie, EOS implementer and entrepreneur. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Nice to be here. Appreciate reconnecting with you.
Okay. And when you have a podcast, like a lot of times I'm being introduced to really cool people. This one's a little bit different. Mike was our EOS implementer, which essentially means business coach, for about 3 years. He transformed our business. He got us more structured than ever. And if there's anybody who taught me the value of structure more than anybody in this world, it's definitely Mike Abercrombie. So thanks for being here.
No, glad to do it. Good to see you again.
So for anyone who's not familiar, without doing the wonderful 90-minute meeting, can you give us an elevator pitch on EOS?
Yeah, we do have an elevator pitch for EOS. So it's a simple set of tools for managing and running an entrepreneurial business that does 3 things we refer to as vision, traction, healthy. This may come back to you, Austin. Vision, getting you and your leadership team on the same page about where you're taking the business. Traction, from a discipline of having accountability up and down the organization to execute on the vision. And then healthy, just working as a cohesive, well-functioning, healthy team, because most teams don't. And over time, we get all of the organization rowing in the same direction towards the results, working as a cohesive organization. So that's the elevator version.
Nice. And I think if you talk to people who've run their business on EOS, like the common sentiment is, oh my God, it's so simple. Like, how was I not doing this before? And I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, because one of the things that I've realized once you know about it, you're like, God, why didn't I do this forever? The part that I felt so foolish about is I would go in and beginning of a year and I have this big manifesto. This is what we're doing this year. Here's what it is. I'd say it once. We'd never document it. Never repeat it, and by mid-February, nobody remembered it. What do you find is the most immediate impact that visionaries and integrators at these companies find when they begin adopting EOS?
So a couple of things. First of all, just to clarify for your listeners, the visionary and integrator that you're referring to is specifically around 2 seats that we refer to as the people who lead the leadership team. So we can get into that a little bit more, but those are the leaders of the team that's leading the organization. But in terms of immediate impact, you're right. It's simple. It's some structure, and we show it to them. And then we immediately lock into a meeting cadence and a structure of the meeting cadence, because most teams don't have great meetings. They don't have a discipline for meetings. They don't use their time wisely. So I think to your question about the initial thing, it's like immediately you're clear on, okay, what's most important? There's 99 things I want to get done. These 3 are the things that I'm committed to doing the next 90 days. So you have that, and then you bring the team together and you work every week in those level 10 meetings. It's like straight out of the gate, the first week is like, whoa, we were really focused, really effective, really efficient. And we went in a straight line instead of zigzagging. So that's pretty much out of the gate, if you remember back in the day when we started.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I love about EOS, maybe it frustrates me too, is more of that visionary personality who's addicted to change and wants to do, is it seems like the book was written in 2007? Is that right?
I believe it's somewhere about there, but I think it was self-published by Gino in 2010.
Okay. And the system is pretty much the same, right? Or has there been any evolution?
There is a little bit of evolution happening right now, but it's very subtle, and it was just released, but it's really subtle stuff. Like, you'd have to be a pretty serious EOS geek to notice the differences, but by and large, it's unchanged.
And one thing I've noticed when it comes to anything that's structured is, like, when you start, you got to go by the book and absolutely adopt every element until it becomes a habit. And that's when you can maybe customize it a little bit to fit your needs. Do you find, I know we used to argue about this all the time. Come on, Mike, go off script.
Yeah, you definitely want to go by the book, but I think the main thing is what people don't appreciate when they read the book. And I went through this when I started my practice. I'd sold the business and said, okay, I'm going to commit myself to EOS. And I vividly remember conversations with some other people that I know that also had similar business. And we're reading this stuff going, that's not it. That's too simple. That doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. And there was a certain amount of lack of belief I had. But to your point, going by the book, what people don't appreciate when they first get introduced, and the simplicity of it, is they don't realize the years and hundreds of days of sessions and leadership teams, it got preceded by a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of trial and error. And so by the time you land on this structure, there's some psychology to it. Anyway, it's pretty well baked out, and you got to trust the process. And then only after you get into it, you go, oh, okay, now I see why we're doing it this way. And then it settles in. Yeah. But on the surface, it's not, this can't work, but it does.
Yeah, I find most entrepreneurs who lean in and adopt it absolutely love it. I think once that visionary personality has done it enough, they go, wait, what if we add on to it this way? Or what if we add to it this way? But what, other than just that apprehension of doing something that rigid or structured, why are some people on the fence on EOS? What is like a hesitation that you run into when you're talking?
I wouldn't say there isn't a hesitation, but let's be clear on who really succeeds with it, because there are a lot of people with very successful businesses who will hate it. And I can help clarify that. You remember, because you're a marketing guy, the marketing strategy, right? We have to have a target market. Who's really the ideal customer? So for EOS, it's privately held companies. That's you guys, of course. Size-wise, it's about 10 to 300 people in the organization, also you guys, right? As it is a lot of people. And then we want them, depending on your practice, I like them in Los Angeles because that's where my business is, but we have EOS implementers all over the world. So we have a demographic, we have a geographic, where do we need the customers? But the most important part is the psychographic. And for EOS teams, people who love it are open-minded, growth-oriented, maybe frustrated, willing to be vulnerable and open with one another. There are a lot of privately held companies of that size who would benefit from structure and discipline and the tools, but they're not growth-oriented. They're not willing to change. They're not frustrated enough. They're not going to be open and honest with their team or their people. And that's fine if that's how you run your business, but ask them to operate that way and it would not work. So to your question about hesitation, for people who possess those traits, who want to be growth-oriented and open-minded and are vulnerable with their teams and are willing to make changes, they just take to it like a duck to water. And there is very little hesitation, if any. It's usually just, explain to me why we're doing it that way. Oh, okay, good. That's about the hesitation. Where you really get it is people who don't possess those psychographic traits. It's not going to be for them.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just certainly who was back then, and I guess still somewhat am a target market for this. But I remember back when we had an office in a pre-pandemic world, you came in late one afternoon, probably after a session with another company, and we sat down and you presented this 90-minute meeting. Mm-hmm. And anytime I've ever got into a conversation with the sales team or my internal sales team, and I say, let's talk about the best sales pitches that we've ever had. Mm-hmm. I always come back to this meeting because I just remember, and you are a very subtly fantastic salesperson because you're very much pushing value and that's it. So I just remember going through this 90-minute meeting and looking at my partner, who is admittedly more frugal than me, David, you are, if you're listening, and just think, like, how much is this going to cost? How much would, please say a number that's attainable. And I don't remember another sales pitch like that. It wasn't, other without giving away the secret sauce. What can you say about that 90-minute meeting, how it's structured, and how it can provide so much value to make somebody feel that way?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, it's actually and literally not a sales pitch. Being a marketing guy and a sales guy yourself, there's nothing I can do to convince you to give me money for some things that you genuinely don't need. I don't have an inventory of out-of-date TVs that I've got to unload, right? This is not what we're doing. What we're really trying to do is help an entrepreneur with pain. You and David were in some pain. Things were a little chaotic. They were picking up, and we got to get it together and get things going. So what we're really trying to do in that meeting is show you something that might, alleviate the pain. And that's all that is. And so the flow of that meeting was to just get to know one another, right? Here's who I am. Here's what EOS is. Here's where I come from. What's your story? Where you guys come from? Where have you been? What are you trying to do? And now we have some little bit of trust and some context. And then based on what you tell me you're trying to accomplish or where your frustrations are, I just show you the tools. Here's what's in EOS. Here's how EOS might apply to that. And then you guys decide if that's right for you. If it's right for you, and in your case it was, off we went, and the rest is history. But for some people, the people who maybe aren't willing to be open and honest and vulnerable, aren't growth-oriented, don't want to work differently, they're like, thanks, Mike, that was really interesting, not for us. And that's totally fine. But the magic also happens, and it happened with you and David, was you guys looked at each other and said, are we willing to do this? Is this a better way to run our business? And the moment the two of you decided, yeah, that's a better way to run the business, the rules changed. Now what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, how we use our time, and how we interface with one another and so on, it clicked differently because we're going to try and do it this way. And so that's really what it is, just making that introduction, seeing it's a fit, and letting the client actually make that decision for themselves, because if they step into EOS, they need to run on EOS, right? And until the team can see that and make that decision collectively, that's a better way to go, it won't stick. So that's really where the magic is. And there's a good number of people who say, nope, not for us. And that's totally fine too.
Yeah, I wonder where ego fits into that, because I remember it probably took us a couple months to really come to the table and say, listen, we started out as freelancers, became a company, and we've just done everything based on what we know.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we just trying to think that we're the smartest people that are going to figure this out? Like, why don't we try and find outside support to be able to get where we wanted to go?
Mm-hmm.
And just even making that choice was a big choice. And then, opening that up, it was just like, okay, wait, this is the system. Because we always joke in marketing, we had the magic button, everybody would hire us. We don't have the magic marketing button. It takes a while to really combine those art and science elements to create the growth that you're looking for. But I feel like this was the closest thing I've ever seen to, we've got a magic button.
It was only that easy.
Yeah.
So,
you said something, I remember in that pitch too, that you were essentially going to be like almost like a fractional COO. And I think that's probably a little bit more for a company our size. We were probably on the closer to that 10 than that 300 employee size. But how does this fit with operations? If I'm an operations professional, if I am a COO, why am I excited about EOS, and why should I not be afraid?
well, I think from an operations standpoint, if I'm the one leading the day-to-day, in your case, it was David, right? Because he kept the back office going while you were out shaking hands and bringing in new business or whatever. I'm oversimplifying there. But the operations people, and for your listeners that don't recall the visionary integrator you were referring to, that's really you guys, right? One of you is more visionary and creative and trying to stir up new ideas, and integrators by definition is the operations person. They get all the various elements of the organization to integrate well and execute on the business plans, right? So that's where those names come from. But from an operations standpoint, to make a healthy organization well-aligned and executing, it takes a lot of stuff. In my years of running a business, I would hire a strategy consultant and we'd have a beautiful blueprint. We didn't have any discipline to execute. Mm-hmm. We'd read some books on goal setting. Oh, let's do goal setting this way. It wasn't anchored to this, right? But then if you have all that stuff and you don't have the right culture, well, it doesn't get done because they're not into it. Or we weren't looking at the right data, or frankly, we just weren't able to call out the elephants in the room and go after the issues and so on. So where I'm going with all that back to the 90-minute meeting is a successful business, we've got to bring a number of elements together. This is one of the things that really drew me to EOS, having hired consultants for this piece and that piece, and you wind up with this patchwork. But it's an operating system in the truest form. If there's any tech people that understand what the role of an operating system is for a business, all the things have to work together. You've got to have a clarity of vision, and you can't get your vision achieved without people. And you have to be objective about how it's performing, and you've got to solve issues, and you got to be open and honest about the issues that you're facing, because you're going to face them, right? We got to create some process, these 6 key components that I'm walking through. We got to have discipline in the form of traction. And so the fact that all that comes together, and a lot of operations people go, wow, and they get very excited about EOS because they've been sitting there pulling all the levers and trying to make it work and doing everything they can. And most of them are experts in whatever trade. In your guys' case, it was software and marketing and so on. But for somebody else, it might be manufacturing or lawyers or whatever their business is. They're good in that business and they wind up in an operational role. And now suddenly there's a set of tools that will do the whole thing together, that orchestrates it all. And so that's really, I think, why operations people really gravitate to it. It makes their life a lot easier.
I want to dive into the visionary and integrator
Sure.
a lot, because
You're one of them.
office, it must have been early June, because you gave us all the books to read. And for some reason, this idea of rocket fuel was the one to listen to first. And I got to admit, I hate the name visionary, because you don't like, that's just something you don't ever want to self-identify as. You sound like a blowhard, but I get it. It's all part of the game. With that said, when I started listening to this book, I was like, I remember texting my partner, like, you have to read this. And the reason why was because I'm like a 99 percentile on this visionary scale.
Oh, yeah.
When I tell you I'm bad at managing people, I need you to listen to this, why I'm bad at managing people. Like, why I can't sit down and like hands-on be patient with somebody and train them. And it was really neat, because as I listened to more of the integrator role, God, it just hit my business partner to a T. But not everybody's like that. Not every visionary is like crazy visionary. Not every integrator is crazy integrator. Where do you see that balance with some of your other clients? And because I've talked to some people who have that struggle, like somebody wants to be the visionary, somebody wants to be the integrator, but neither of them are really that extreme either way. How do you balance that out?
Let's separate. There's the business and the people. So a business needs to have vision. It needs to be generating ideas and relationships, and it needs to innovate and create opportunities. So that just goes without saying. Whatever the business commits to doing, it's got to execute. It's got to get all the people in the organization rowing in the same direction, executing and staying in sync and following through and being accountable and blah, blah, blah. So the business needs that stuff regardless. Now, let's take humans. You and David, you guys are great folks, really care about each other and the business, but you're wired very differently. Doesn't make one of you better or worse than the other. You are crazy visionary. You're constantly thinking of ideas. You're very emotive. You don't have the same attention span that David does. You don't like managing people, right? It's a different thing. David's very project driven, very in the weeds, very specific, very accountable. Maybe doesn't have some of the same ideation things that you do, or at least he ideates in different things more around his operation and technical stuff and things like that. You're just different people. We're all wired differently that way. So what the visionary and integrator relationship does is it says, hey, these things serve the business, these functions. Now let's look, when we put the people in those seats, who's naturally predisposed to this, right? And the call out from EOS is that rather than have a leader, we have a visionary and an integrator. We actually have two leaders. And by doing so, we're able to put a spotlight on what activities need to happen for the betterment of the business there, which are different. Over here, what we do is we just identify the people that are predisposed to have those vocational alignments. And you and David are like a classic example. But there's people in the middle like me. If your listeners are curious about this, the book's called Rocket Fuel, which is describing the relationship between these two leaders in an organization. And you can go to, I believe it's rocketfuel.com, or just type in Rocket Fuel University. And there's a crystallizer assessment that you can take to see, are you pre-wired? Are you really a visionary in terms of how you think and work, or are you more of an integrator type? I score relatively high on both, but I'm higher on the visionary. So to your point, I absolutely identify as a visionary, and I'm wearing it more proudly all the time. But I've got a reasonable strength in integrator. But the thing is, so that doesn't mean I could do both, but it gives me greater self-awareness to where my natural gifts are. Because if we can keep people working in their natural gifts, good things happen, right? The work is better. It's more passionate. It flows more easily. It's more efficient and so on. But I can move back and forth a little bit. So I think it's just knowing the business needs both, using something like the crystallizer assessment to identify the natural gifts of people who might fill those roles in your organization, just making sure it's a fit. And you can have people that are good in both, but then you just got to know, which hat am I wearing on any given day and what is my role? And that's why the cadence and the relationship between the two need to be maintained over time. I know you and David got into regular meetings and same page just because you're bringing different things. And so we want to keep you guys together. So long-winded answer just to say business needs things. People are wired different, and we use them to mash them up for the greater good of the business.
Nice. And both of those roles sit on top of the accountability chart. And in EOS, We don't use org charts. We use accountability charts.
Correct.
And these accountability charts become the bane of our existence. I had one that was so solid for 2 years, and I didn't appreciate it. It's when you're sick and you're like, God, why don't I appreciate the days when I'm not sick? It was like, oh my God, I got another huge accountability chart headache. Why didn't I appreciate those 2 years when we were at that size and everybody knew the role and it was perfect? So talk a little bit about the accountability chart, how it's different from the org chart, and why it's always evolving and can be a challenge for us to get.
Oh, yeah. So in EOS, there's this thing we refer to as the 5 foundational tools. Like these just are non-negotiables. You got to have them. And one of them is the accountability chart, right? So your listeners are probably familiar with an org chart. We've all seen those. This box and this box all report, and you can see the structure of the teams and who reports to who. There's a couple flaws with those. One is they don't really have any detail other than who you report to, which isn't the whole story, because if I'm responsible for a team or a given role in an organization, I need to know more about what I'm doing than just who I report to. They also just show the title. You're the senior VP of this thing or whatever. One of the reasons we don't use them with EOS is both of those have ego. I want to be the SVP, not the VP. Like, why do we care about that? So that's where Visionary and Integrator come from. We use functional titles so that we actually can hire a new employee and they can see what that person in that, we call them seats on those boxes, what that person actually does for the organization. I'm an integrator. I'm not the president. I'm an integrator because I got to get all the functions working together. So we use functions instead of titles. That's more objective. And then instead of just leaving the boxes connected to one another, we actually fill out the box with primary roles and responsibilities. Typically, it's the 5 most significant roles and responsibilities. And it becomes a communication tool. It provides a lot of clarity across the organization because I can now look at the 25 people on the team and I can see the left hand, what it's doing, and I can see what the right hand's doing, and I can see what my hands are doing. And it helps to identify the strategy. It helps to provide organizational clarity, helps me to get my head around who does what, and helps me communicate because I know where to go things. But to your point about it being the bane of your existence, that's because as organizations change, new things, you grow, you have new products, new customers, you need to bring new people in, or you improve how you do things. You maybe can do it more efficiently now. So what's happening is the structure of the organization and who's doing what will change over time. And so that's why you're drawn back to it time and time again. And many times when something doesn't go well in the business, it's because somebody didn't realize they were responsible for it or whatnot. But as the leader of the organization, you've always got to have organizational clarity and accountability, who's doing what, and it's just going to change over time. So the council it's not a documentation exercise. It's actually a power tool to manage your business and execute on your strategy by working through, okay, how am I going to get this done? A little bit like a coach on a sports team, a warning to everybody. I screw up sports metaphors. What's the play we're going to run this quarter? How are we going to set the players up to go execute against the goals? That's what the accountability chart's doing. And we're trying to encourage teams to come back and make sure that it's continually reset, kept up to date for a host of reasons, namely which executing against whatever your goals are, which change over time. That's why you have to keep coming back to it.
So I love when we talk about the foundation and the framework. So you mentioned the 5 key components, the accountability chart being one of them. What are the other 4?
Yeah, so these are foundational tools, and hopefully on your podcast you can work in some of the visuals so people can see it. But there are 6 key components to the business, which is what I referred to: vision, people, data, issues, process, and traction. Talked about that earlier, but these are 5 foundational tools. So in that 90-minute meeting, you were talking about these are the pillars, if you will, of executing with the EOS framework. So one of them is the accountability chart, which we just talked through, who's doing what. The other one is what we call the VTO for short. It stands for Vision Traction Organizer. And essentially, it's a document that will force the leadership team. Remember I said in the elevator pitch, we got to get you guys on the same page about where you're taking the business. That's what we're going to do. That document will be the summation of your leadership team getting on the same page about where you're taking it. And then we use that to make sure all the people in the organization understand it, understand their part in it, and are rowing in the same direction. So second document is the VTO, which essentially is where the strategy is crystallized and communicated. And then from there, we have to execute. So having I think you mentioned them earlier, these things called rocks. We just call them rocks from the Stephen Covey 7 Habits reference back in the 80s about putting in your most important things. A rock is essentially your 3 to 7 most important priorities for a given quarter. And Attack, the organization, has a set of priorities, a set of rocks. You and David and everybody on your team has a set of rocks. So just imagine the organization, everybody's crystal clear on their highest priorities every quarter. Those are rocks. So that's the third one. And then we have to be accountable for the rocks and the performance of the business throughout the quarter. So we have to have a meeting pulse where we come together, reset priorities, extract wisdom from what we've done, reset priorities, and get back out and do it again. So that meeting pulse is really important. And because you guys dropped right into that level 10 meeting, that's the weekly meeting. But the meeting pulse is not just the weekly meeting, it's every quarter, which I know you guys are still doing, setting a plan. And then once we have that plan for the quarter, we keep that thing on check by doing a weekly meeting. So there's a meeting pulse. And then the final one is the scorecard, just having a scorecard that'll give us an objective measure on a handful of numbers that hopefully are leading indicators that would predict where the business is going. And the discipline there is not to look at a fancy dashboard, but to understand what are the few numbers that are going to predict where this business is going. And let's be disciplined about actually asking ourselves what those numbers are telling us, and then having a discussion about actions that we need to take to change the numbers so that we can change the trajectory of the business. So summarizing, the accountability chart, who's doing what, the VTO, the vision, everybody on the same page where we're going, rocks, everybody heads down, focus on our highest priority, meetings, keeping it all together and on track, and then scorecard, just being objective about the data.
Nice. I'm good to have you on again because I've got a million follow-ups on the scorecard and the process component of VOS.
All right, happy to.
Particularly how technology is butting into them. But I want to make sure that we cover this one topic because I think you might be the only other person I know. You use EOS in your personal life quite a bit, don't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Tell the listeners how you're able to use many of these tools in your personal life.
Yeah, I'd love to get the accountability chart done so my teenager knows exactly what their responsibility is and what my wife's responsibility is versus mine. Let's just say we don't have the same level of adoption at home that we have in-house. But my journey is the same with a lot of EOS clients and EOS implementers because, and you know this, I think we've had this conversation over the years, you get into it, so wait, I'm suddenly much more clear about trying to create the life I want and what I'm trying to do, what role my business is playing, and what my objectives are. So you have that sudden clarity. And then you start to realize if I just work in sprints like 90 days at a time, and if I could just stay focused on a few things that really matter, suddenly you wake up 2 years later, it's wow, things are actually moving in a direction, right? And you learn to be honest about your issues so that we can have those hard conversations and move past them. And I went through this. I think you went through this. Everybody goes through this. It's like you're sitting around with your teammates going, my family doesn't run this well. Like we're not on the same page about where we're going. We don't have the hard conversations. We don't come back to it. We don't focus. We're all over the map and we're just going through, not going through the motions, but we're just making it up as we go, which is what most entrepreneurial teams do as well. So you have this realization, like, how can I bring this home right now? There are some who are crazy and do it literally by the book at home. My family's not that way, but we do see the discipline because we're the beneficiaries. My practice has been good. My client's practice has been good, and we want some of that. So we have a VTO, that vision component. And for listeners, I think you have one, Austin. There's a personal VTO where instead of a marketing strategy, we have a bucket list of things we want to do together and things like that. But there's a VTO document, and we have it. We have some plans and some values for the family and some vision about where we want to go. And we have some goals for the year. And then we do reset those every quarter just to keep us focused on some initiatives that we're trying to move together. And we don't do a full level 10 and scorecard and all that, but it has brought Sherry and I to a discipline where every 2 weeks on Sundays, we'll sit down, we have an issues list, and we have a discipline of talking and bringing it up and having conversations about the stuff that we need to be working through as a family to achieve the things we want to do. And just that cadence has not only allowed us to get things done that we want to, just on a connection level and a relationship level, it feels really good. And it's really rewarding for me to know every couple of weeks I'm going to actually sit down eyeball to eyeball with my wife and talk about things that matter. And that's like It's such a great connection. So we're using the VTO, we're using the issues list, we're using a little bit of a meeting cadence. It's been impactful.
Yeah, I have a personal VTO, which I have some gaps. I'm not able to get the family on board completely. I've been told that family meetings shouldn't be business meetings. I've got to just come in from a different angle. I'll get there.
No, I have, my daughter I hate family meetings. So we do not do, same as your family, we're not going to put it that structured because Lila just won't sit through it. But we're able to align. Sherry and I will do the lion's share. We'll get on the same page about where we're going for a quarter or for the year. And then again, I think it's just been really impactful to bring us back and sit down every couple of weeks.
Yeah, I fill one out every single year. I have my annual goals. I think one of the cool things is you look at that like lifetime wish list or bucket list, and every year you just go, okay, this is what I want to do. What am I picking off this year? And you just start compiling them, and you start achieving more things, and you're living a lot less aspirational and more being, you know, the person that you want to be. And I think you see yourself as having the potential to be.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. I actually had somebody who is an old friend who went into recovery last year, and we spoke towards the new year, and I was like, I just want to show you this thing that I did. I know you're trying to refocus and try and figure out what life is going to mean in these new steps. And I had him fill it out, and it's been really impactful for him. And
it clarifies, and we do this with the teams, right? The vision document, this VTO thing we've been talking to, it clarifies the thought. Like, okay, we've got to be committed to a few things. So what do we want to do? And it creates a context for decisions and focus. And so that's really the value. And you're getting it the same. Anytime you get people together to work on something, whether it's a family to try and live together and achieve a life that they want, or a business to hit profit and financial security and so on, you just got to get on the same page and focus. And I think the unwritten power of EOS 2 is it tells you what to say no to. Because these things matter. And then you wake up 2 or 3 years down the road having said no to everything because this is what you're going to do. And lo and behold, you've achieved it. And it's wow.
So true. If it doesn't fit on your path, then take it out. I love it. All right. My last question. I always like to see where our guests maybe utilize some structure, some systems, have their own frameworks in their personal life. I know you use EOS, but you also have this thing that you do with your kids every summer that I think is just the coolest. So you tell your audience about what summer looks like for the Abercrombies?
Yeah, so I can, but I think a little bit of context here. And when I first heard this, I didn't believe it. Several years later, I now believe it. And it's this thing we refer to, and I think where I'm going on is what we call the EOS Life. And the EOS Life was a product of everybody realizing the impact they've had by running their businesses on EOS, and then for some running their business or their families on EOS. But it's 5 simple things. Just get your head around this for a minute. It's doing work that you love with people that you love. Imagine that, right? Making a huge difference in whatever you're doing, being appropriately compensated, and having time for other passions. And that last one's the one that most people will miss out. So work you love with people you love, making a huge difference, appropriately compensated, and time for other passions. And so as my practice took off, I did what every entrepreneur does. I just pedal harder and longer and faster, and at the expense of either making the money I needed to or having the time. But as it settles in, which it did, then now we really try and maintain that balance. So what we wanted to do in terms of time for other passions was to take our children on an international trip to expose them to other cultures. And so we have gotten onto a habit of every summer taking a really big long trip, getting an Airbnb in another country where they don't speak English, and just settling in and trying to figure out how do you get to the grocery store around here, and what's the transport like, and just what do they eat, and then we just settle into a different country and try and get them to be familiar with it. And it's just been really rewarding. But we couldn't have done it had we not committed to a line of work that was making a difference, and then being intentional about what mattered to us and structuring our time accordingly and so on. So that's our version of the EOS Life.
All right. And where's the next stop? Where are you headed this summer?
Interestingly, it's just now starting to shift because Lila's getting ready to go to college. So we won't be doing a full, this is the first year we're not going to do a full multi-week trip together because Lila's going to be working on college. And so it's going to be college searching. But wise sage that my wife is. She says, we got to get a few of these in because as they age, they're going to want to do something different. And that's just starting to creep in right now. But it's been a really good run.
Do it while you can. That's all.
Exactly.
Mike, thank you so much for being here. This was amazing. I could talk to you forever. And
thank you.
I'm definitely going to have you back because I want to dive into all the different elements of EOS. It is such an amazing system that's changed my life and your life. And I could not sell people more on it.
Good. Austin, it's great. I've enjoyed maintaining the relationship with you since we met. Congratulations on everything you're doing. Give my regards to David and the team. Happy to be back and happy to help anybody out with this. This is just so much fun. This is the impactful work that makes it really rewarding. So for my EOS life.
Yep. And where can the audience find you?
Just go on to eosworldwide.com and then just type in implemented. You'll find me. You can also get me. Mike at mikeabercrombie.com is the easiest email address to spell. But yeah, either way. Or they can reach out to you on the podcast. You can route them over to me.
Absolutely. I could not recommend you enough.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right.
Much, Mike.
Be well, Austin. Good to see you. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.